I feel like this is, maybe even a bigger theme than I thought. That, since we began these live streams a little over 3 years ago, one of the things we keep returning to is, are you measuring the right thing? Have you asked the right question? And is the answer that you have had returned to you, or that you're returning to us, meaningful? Just because it has numbers associated with it doesn't mean those are true numbers, or that they are numbers that are in any way meaningful. And if you haven't measured the right thing, if you're talking about antibodies and are simultaneously informing us that for the first time in history, natural immunity is meaningless, then I'm sorry, your expertise is bullshit. Like, we have every reason to think you don't know what you're talking about.
Well, there is I don't know what to call it, probably internal to the places that these things are decided. There is some name for this process, right? Some euphemism that they use to explain why they're doing it. But pushing you off of a metric that matters in order that you obsess over something that they can control, right? In other words, why did we not measure all-cause mortality and figure out what the effect of COVID was and the various treatments? Right. All-cause mortality, that sounds like a measure you could get behind. Right. Does it make me live longer? Maybe I'm not interested in taking the risks if it doesn't. Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, it does seem to make you live longer. Well, then that might be something worth taking the risk, because, in fact, the benefits seem to exceed them. Right. So,
yes,
all of these things are not as hard as we are now making them out to be, for reasons that are a little obscure.
I mean, it is. I'm remembering when I taught animal behavior, when we were college professors and I taught animal behavior, and I did it, as you know, in a way that was possible to do at Evergreen because it was full-time programs. And so it was holistic. And so it wasn't a 4-credit animal behavior class. It was a 16-credit or sometimes a year-long, 48-credit thing, in which students were expected to generate their own hypotheses. And students were expected to generate their own observations, from which they were expected to generate their own hypotheses and predictions. And then the tests, either the experimental tests or the carefully designed observational techniques and processes by which they could test their hypotheses. And I taught them enough statistics that they could then analyze the data that they collected, having designed what they would do, having gone out and actually collected the data. And they did literature review, and they wrote up the papers, including both the analysis and what they thought it meant, and they gave talks. So all of that, which frankly, there's a lot of PhDs in sciences out there who haven't done all of those steps, and my undergraduates did. But one of the things that I love a lot in that process, and that I was always interested to find, was maybe the most challenging. Not a lot of students just caught into it right away, but a lot of students had a very hard time. And I think it's a little bit about mathy logicalness stuff, but it's not entirely it, was figuring out what actually needed to be measured. Like the experimental design part, which I loved. Okay, now you have the question, and that's great. You've come up with a great question. You have good predictions. You know how you will discern between these two hypotheses, or it is possible. You've got two alternative hypotheses. How will you discern between them? What do you need to go out and measure? What do you need to observe in those birds or whatever it is in order to discern between these two things? And that was a huge sticking point for a lot of people. And for me, I cared a lot less if they ended up knowing, how to run a t-test or a Kruskal-Wallis, or, do a great literature review or anything. If they could figure out, having characterized truly alternative hypotheses, what they would need to measure in order to discriminate between them, there it is right there. Now you know how to think. Now you know how to go out into the world and apply that to anything.
And
anything.
At the point that the data comes back, and you actually see a difference between the two populations.
It's so amazing.
Right. It's like, wow.
And it's and you own that. You didn't outsource any of that. You black boxed none of that. And then, I also preferred things like goodness of fit tests for stats, like chi-squares. You can literally do this on the back of an envelope. You don't actually need to plug this into any kind of algorithm and have it go, now let me think. Okay, I call it significant. Oh, I don't know. Is it really? Better if you can do these really simple inferential statistics where you can actually, with one little table of values go oh, that is, as it looks to me, significant.
Yeah, you're demystifying the process, which is so important because, I mean, we've just watched civilization go mad over the fact that people didn't really know what science even was. They sort of think they know what it looks like, and that made them very easy to fool. But, it may not look like that. It could look like, a scruffy person in a forest somewhere, counting things in a way that you don't even realize that that's what they're doing.
Right.
And, do they have an envelope? Maybe they didn't need one. They could do the stats in the dirt. Right.
Yeah.
And the point is you either did the science part right or you didn't. It doesn't matter at all whether it looked like you did the science part right, whether you were wearing the right clothing or had the right equipment or anything like that.
If you measured the wrong thing, if you didn't have hypotheses going in, or if you did, but then you measured something that could not allow you to distinguish between them, you don't know anything more than you did. I mean, you may know some more stuff, but you don't know anything scientifically more than you did. And you can't say, I did the science and.
You may even know less than that, right? In fact, I was listening to a podcast with John Ioannidis today, who's one of the most published academics alive. And anyway, he wrote a famous paper about why most published results aren't likely to be true. And the point is, okay, it's one thing that there's no information in them. It's another thing that people think there is.
That's right.
Right? And that they may be stacking lots of stuff on top of conclusions that don't make any sense. And this was certainly true in psychology, but when the p-hacking crisis, the replicability crisis, arose in psychology, it was pretty clear that psychology might have a special version of the problem, but it wasn't going to be limited to psychology. It's anything where p-values were, currency.
Right. Which is to say all of the social sciences and the part of biology that has replicates.
That's statistical, yeah.